What's up, everyone? If you don't know me, my name is Denzel Mensah. I'm an ENFJ, 9-wing-1, social sexual in the Myers-Briggs and Enneagram system, and I'm also a certified life, personal development, and relationship coach. And today, I'm going to be talking to y'all about how you, as a man, can develop your more feminine side. Lean into more of your feminine energy. And we're going to get a lot into like what exactly that entails and what does that not entail and why it's important. Let's get it. So back in 2018, Personality Hacker dropped a podcast series. Definitely one of my top 3 favorite podcast series that they've dropped. If you don't know about Personality Hacker, y'all should definitely check out personalityhacker.com, and especially their podcast, especially if you're interested in concepts and, Myers-Briggs personalities and Enneagram and just a whole bunch of frameworks and models to be able to better understand people. But they dropped a podcast series on the books Gods in Every Man and Goddesses in Every Woman, written by Jean Shanita Bolin. And by the way, I have the Goddesses in Every Woman book right here. And I have the Gods in Every Man book over there. So after I listened to the podcast series and learned all about that, then about a year or 2 later, I ended up actually getting my own books to be able to read it from the horse's mouth herself. And essentially what that podcast series was about was demonstrating the different ways that masculine and feminine energy could be portrayed. And they were being portrayed in different archetypes that were represented by the Greek gods and goddesses. And so, for example, Zeus, as a father god, would be representing a certain aspect of masculinity, whereas it might be different from how maybe like Hades would be presented, or even especially even like Apollo as a sun god, or even Hermes, or even like, Dionysus, things like that. And then with the Goddesses in Every Woman, it was talking about different ways that femininity can show up. Now, a big important thing to understand is that when we're talking about these archetypes, which is essentially a type of model or a type of thing that we have all kind of like came to understand in the psyche. So like examples of archetypes could be like the jock. If we say like the jock, we kind of already know like, okay, this is what we're talking about. Or if we say like the hero, a villain, a child, a wise old man, a joker, these types of things, these are pretty much archetypes. And so when we think of archetypes, it's not supposed to be all embodying. So nobody's supposed to be fully a Zeus energy. I see these more as like a round table, and all of the gods and goddesses maybe are like around there, but they're the most prominent voices, not just the most prominent voice, but the most prominent voices are kind of like being vocalized. And sure, like for someone like me, I had more of like a ranking to be able to see like, okay, what maybe might be like my most dominant energy that shows up most often, but not necessarily meaning that defines who I am per se, because I'm a mix of these specific stronger types of energies that kind of like all make a mix. Hopefully that makes sense. So with the Goddesses in Every Woman book, it goes into the idea of how different goddesses in the Greek mythologies represented the different forms of femininity. So the way in which a Demeter would show up with, very like motherly and nurturing in that sense, is a different type of femininity than maybe like an Artemis or even an Athena. But these are all still under the umbrella of femininity. So these books introduced me to the idea of how different energies, like how we can characterize different types of ways that masculinity and femininity can show up. And the reason why I bring up these books and these podcasts, which by the way, if you want to go check those out, I'll put the links in the descriptions below. But the reason why I bring them up is because when I first got into all of this, I listened to the podcasts and about all the gods and everything. And I'm like, okay, I relate mostly to Hermes, and then also to like Apollo, and then even there's some Hades in there, stuff like that. And then I was like, but nothing really like was like super, super, super resonant And again, this wasn't me trying to like be like, oh, I'm completely this, but I was at least trying to figure out like, okay, what am I most like? Or like what energies are most there? And essentially what I came to find was that Aphrodite was actually the most prominent energy that I related to at the time. Like there was just so much that was said in the Aphrodite podcast that was actually kind of blowing my mind, especially back then where there was still a lot of different things that I was like, learning and developing and trying to like get my sense of self in. And I honestly kind of felt embarrassed about that because I'm like, yo, like I'm a man, what do I look like having like a dominant feminine energy? Even though if you really look at the book and everything, Aphrodite is pretty bad. But yeah, with all of that, I was very embarrassed with having Aphrodite as a dominant energy that I related to over all of the other gods and goddesses. Again, it was like more like Aphrodite, and then Hermes was like right over there, and then you have like Apollo and Hades, and Demeter even was mixed in there, and just this kind of like combination. And I was like, man, like this, what does this say about like my masculinity or whatever like that? Nobody's ever called me feminine before. So I'm like, what does this mean? And as I continue to grow about that, like over the years, and that's when I really start to learn more about what it means to be tapped into not only your feminine energy, what it even means to be masculine, but also just this term anima. Now, I love this book so far, Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung, which is also having like Marie von Franz and, some others that kind of like really have been portrayed throughout the book. But one of the biggest things that have been interesting in this book is the section on the anima, which is the woman within. And I wanted to read a few sections from there. The anima is a personification of all feminine psychological tendencies in a man's psyche, such as vague feelings and moods, prophetic hunches, receptiveness to the irrational capacity for personal love, feeling for nature, and last but not least, his relation to the unconscious. So essentially what the book is saying is that an anima is the part of a man that's his more what we would call his feminine side. The things that we usually equate to feminine energy is what a man would equate to like his anima. And so when you're looking at these archetypes, for example, like every man has an anima and then every woman has an animus. So if, for example, a woman is to be developing her more masculine energy, then she would be trying to focus on the animus. With all that being said, there are a lot of issues when you have an imbalance between your masculine energy and your feminine energy. When you have an imbalance between your anima and your animus, you have to make sure that these two have like a pretty good balance to them, or else there's a lot of like unhealthy things that can come out of that, which we're going to get into. But to continue with some other things that the book said, the anima is the side that enables them to connect with the ghost land. For example, what we all call the unconscious. In its individual manifestation, the character of a man's anima is a rule shaped by his mother. If he feels that his mother had a negative influence on him, his anima will often express itself in irritable, depressed moods, uncertainty, insecurity, and touchiness. So, when we're talking about the anima, that means like the feminine part in a man, the feminine energy in a man, then we are talking about the part of them that really gets tapped into introspection, that really gets tapped into their feelings, that really gets tapped into self-care, their own types of nurture, that really gets tapped into their own unconscious and intuition. These are things that are more represented with feminine energy. It's not to say that men do not have this, but we're equating it with feminine energy, and men who do actually tap into these parts of themselves are starting to raise their feminine energy. So you can see how this could be very helpful for a man who's trying to be more balanced. It's important for a man to be introspective, right? It's important for a man to be emotionally balanced, to be able to be in tune with his emotions and not let the emotions control him, but also still at least be aware of them, be emotionally aware of what's going on around him. It's really good for a man to be able to tap into his own unconscious, because the unconscious, if you're not tapped into it, it's going to unconsciously control you. And so once you tap into that type of feminine energy, then now it's going to also help you balance out with that more masculine energy that you might already have, which maybe goes more into like your competitive nature, to your linear way of thinking, to a lot of like more rational, logical thought, which, by the way, is not to say that women are incapable of being rational and logical and competitive and, ambitious in these things. These, just like what we said about, feminine energy, these are what we at least attribute to masculine energy. And both sides can have it, just like, a woman can have an animus, just like a man can also have an anima. But since we're focusing on men developing their feminine side, pretty much men getting in tap with their anima, let's talk a little bit about what happens when you're not tapped into that anima. So according to Man and His Symbols, another way in which the negative anima in a man's personality can be revealed is in waspish, poisonous, effeminate remarks by which he devalues everything. Remarks of this sort always contain a cheap twisting of the truth and are in subtle way destructive. So if you think about the types of men who kind of like always, maybe like, for example, like if we're talking like red pill type of men, like men who just have this like anger toward women in general, who always feel like women are up to something conniving, they don't really have like a good relationship with a lot of women. They're objectifying women. They feel like they always have to dominate women. They don't trust women. Those are men who are really out of touch with their anima, because they can only really see women as either an object or as something that needs to be dominated, something that's sexual, or something that's nefarious and sinister in nature. And when men are really tapped into their anima, then they can often actually have a much more balanced and realistic perspective of other women, because then they're able to actually understand the woman within. And understanding the woman within, they're able to also understand the woman outside of them. These are why you'll have men who are really good at being able to connect with and interact with women. And then you'll also have men who like literally cannot connect with women, and they just are always around other men. Oh yeah, let's just keep talking about football and not really talk about our emotions. Let's keep talking about work and our ambitions, and let's just keep on being competitive in nature, and boom, boom, let's just drink beers. Let's just play video games. Obviously, these are not necessarily bad things, and men are able to connect in those ways. But when you have that imbalance and you just have all of that type of energy, but you're not actually talking about your feelings, you're not actually trying to make more meaningful, more introspective types of things, when you're just all about ambition and competitiveness and, just kind of like getting ahead and dominating, then we see how that affects men a lot of the times nowadays. Because now those same men, a lot of times they're dumping on women because those are the only kind of like anima type of energy that they're able to receive in their life, and it frustrates them a lot of times too. But then at the same time, they aren't really willing to tap into their own anima. And a lot of times they don't even know that they are, or they're actively resisting so because they're afraid of being effeminate. But sometimes this unhealthy balance and this unhealthy imbalance of the anima can also do a lot of damages for men as well. Let's say, for example, an anima of this sort can turn men into sentimentalists, or they may become as touchy as old maids, or as sensitive as the fairy tale princess who could feel a pea under 30 mattresses. Most frequent manifestations of the anima takes the form of erotic fantasy. Men may be driven to nurse their fantasies by looking at films and striptease shows, or by daydreaming over pornographic material. This is a crude, primitive aspect of the anima, which becomes compulsive only when a man does not sufficiently cultivate his feeling relationships, when his feeling attitude toward life has remained infantile. And so pretty much the book goes on to also talk about how there's another side of that imbalance with the anima, where these are men who maybe become way too soft, for example, and they're maybe a little bit too tapped into their emotions, so now they're even overly sensitive, maybe to a point where they are even fantasizing about other women like all the time. So it's still in a way like objectifying the woman, but now they're like casting their projections onto a woman, and they're falling in love with the women so easily. But it's more of like a limerence, because they don't even really know the woman. They're just projecting and casting fantasies onto that person. This is pretty much a person who has not really done well to balance out and get like a good healthy balance of their masculine energy and their feminine energy. A man who is pretty much not only not tapped into the anima, but also maybe overly tapped into the anima and needs to bring in some more animist type of energy there. The book also even goes on to say that the anima is, for instance, responsible for the fact that a man is able to find the right marriage partner. Whenever a man's logical mind is incapable of discerning facts that are hidden in his unconscious, the anima helps him to dig them out. In establishing this inner radio reception, the anima takes on the role of the guide or mediator to the world within and to the self. We all know that there are a lot of men out there who are so not tapped into themselves that they kind of just drive everybody else mad. They're so full of that masculine energy or whatever that sure, they're dominating and all of that, but there's no sensitivity to their touch. They're not able to connect with their daughters. They're not even really able to connect with their wives. You know, they're just all about looking good. They're just all about getting to the top. They're just all about making the money. But when you really get into the introspection, when you really tap into your own feelings, when you really tap into your own intuition, your own unconscious, you're able to actually have more meaningful and connective relationships with other people. It's not just about corporate work all day. It's not just about sports. It's not just about drinking beers and just making crude jokes all the time, you know? Now you're actually bringing like more of your actual self into the dynamic. You're nurturing each other. You're also nurturing yourself in the process. You're able to connect more deeply with other people in a more meaningful way. This is what feminine energy can bring to us. And this should not be mistaken for being effeminate. That's a very different type of thing. I've always loved the book by Justin Baldoni, Man Enough. I also believe that he's an ENFJ. And I think that there are just certain personality types, for example, that have an inclination toward being more in touch with their feminine energy. And again, I really want to emphasize that this is not to be confused with being more effeminate in nature. I think that to be effeminate means to actually like tap into kind of like feminine behaviors, if you will. And that's different from like feminine energies. So like when we're talking about like feminine energies, then we're talking about what I just shared, you know, like the introspection, you know, being more tapped into with your emotions and all that. Whereas like feminine, like being effeminate could be more of like how you walk, like literally like maybe like how you walk, how you speak to certain people, certain gestures that you might do. Now, that's not to say that if you don't overly expand your anima, then you'll never start to produce these types of traits. I could definitely see that happening. But the main point that I want to make is that usually when you hear of somebody like actually like, you know, trying to develop their feminine energy, or if they have like feminine energy, then a lot of times people might assume that this is somebody who's incredibly sensitive, who's incredibly soft, who's incredibly like a crybaby of some sort, someone who might seem like a woman, you know, traditionally speaking. And that's not always the case. There are a lot of masculine men out there who have also been able to tap into their divine feminine energy, so that it can bring more balance. And this is, again, helping them to be able to actually move through the world with that type of balance of like, okay, sure, I am being linear. I'm going with logical, rational thought, but I'm also keeping the sentimental elements here in mind. I'm also being introspective. I'm also nurturing other people. I'm being able to be more connective with other people. These type of balances really make for the best types of men out there, and even women in general too, because then they're able to actually attain the things that they want on both sides. Okay, so this doesn't mean that I have to go and do my nails, Denzel, or like to like make my hair all kind of, no, you don't have to do any of that. That's all more being effeminate. But if you want to now develop more of this feminine energy, I do have some suggestions for you. For starters, maybe you should start getting into poetry. Poetry allows you to be able to tap into yourself, whether you're reading it or especially if you're writing it, it allows you to tap into yourself. It allows you to be able to like understand the beauties of life around you. It allows you to be able to, just look at the things around you and like appreciate it for what it is, instead of just always being like on the go, just like, oh, what am I feeling right now? What am I seeing right now? And how does what I'm seeing make me feel, and kind of putting it into an artistic, creative, poetic manner. The feminine energy is actually really responsible for the side of the brain that is very creative, and it's very and it's responsible for being like artistic and just kind of being a lot more colorful, whereas like the other side of the brain is more of that masculine energy side, which is like very logical, very like rational, linear, competitive, driven. Again, we need both sides of the coin to be able to be a full whole person. Also, another suggestion, start having more conversations with other women. Women naturally will have a lot more feminine energy, just like men will naturally have a lot more masculine energy. And that's not to say that you'll never run into women who are more masculine according to these terms, or men who are more feminine according to these terms. But the more time that you spend talking with women, like groups of women, that type of energy, even if not all of them are like necessarily feminine in nature, they produce, like, there's an energy that now is created that allows you to be able to engage with the feminine energy that's being conjured, and you're able to actually it arouses and stirs even your own feminine energy, which is why there's a lot of men who are unable to kind of sit in those type of environments for too long. Now, again, it doesn't have to be anything too crazy. You do not have to go, to like get your nails done with like 5 other women, or like, just talk about guys all day. Like it's not necessarily that type of energy, but maybe some things like, sitting down with other women and hearing like them talk and like engaging in their conversations about their emotions and their different types of dynamics and the different types of things that they experience and what they feel throughout the day. And then sharing some of that even like, from yourself, their opinions on different matters, like, for example, I know that I always get a kick from y'all saw that I made the video on Love is Blind, and I was typing them. I would never really be watching Love is Blind if it wasn't for my wife, who is a woman, and she even had a watch party, and she had all women at the watch party pretty much. And it was so interesting to hear what all of these women had to say, because I was thinking like, oh, wow, well, I think the boom, boom, boom. But then hearing their perspectives on different relationships and everything like that, whether I agreed with it or not, was very interesting. And it helped me to be able to have a more holistic view of how to approach certain things in life, how women actually think. And if you understand how women actually think, well, you're winning in life. Just like women who understand how men think are also often winning in life. But you can't just have this linear focus. So yeah, another way to really like bring up and grow that feminine energy to a balance, if you're a man, is to have more conversations with women. I also recommend getting into dance as well. Finding a way to just kind of like let loose, have fun, and be in your body, express yourself in different types of artistic ways. I think that that's really allowing for that more feminine side. We all know those men who can really like move their hips. You know what I mean? Like when you're watching, like, for example, like Latin men and how they're able to like play the guitar at times, or like how a lot of them are able to like move their hips as they're like salsa dancing and stuff like that. Or that's men who are tapped into their feminine energy. And the funny thing is, those men who are usually able to dance and tap into their feminine energy in that way, they're actually usually more capable of pulling women than a lot of the men who are like, oh, no, I don't dance, I'm too cool, stuff like that. Because they're actually able to relate to the woman more. And when a woman sees that you're able to relate to her, then it just makes it so much better. Now, the women are not usually trying to get you to be full on like how they are. And even if they say that they're trying to get you to be like that, they usually do not mean it that way. But it does definitely help to be able to understand how they operate, to be able to understand that, hey, my masculine energy that always just wants to fix things, there's a feminine side that's just like, oh, I'm just sitting here and I'm just observing and I'm just emotionally relating. Watched a video by Craig Kegley, I believe his name is, where he was actually speaking about this as well. And it's funny because I've watched a lot of his videos before. Funny enough, I also believe that he's an ENFJ, and he actually talked also about the balance between masculine energy and feminine energy. I recommend that y'all check him out. But one of the things that he said in that video that I actually thought was pretty cool was he said that it's better to pretty much change your to change the mood of a woman than the mind of a woman, something along those lines. Go check out the video so that I'm not misquoted, but essentially what it was that the better that you're able to actually be present with the woman and be able to actually like focus on her and like understand her, it's going to really help you to be able to also understand like, oh, this is how I should operate when I'm engaging with other women, and even how to treat yourself at times. So with all that said, what do you guys think? Please be sure to leave any questions, comments, or concerns in the comment section below. I would love to hear them. If you are a man who has already developed his feminine energy or has been working on that, please let me know. I would love to know some ways in which it not only benefited you, but even how you were able to do that to begin with. And I would also like to know from women who have seen men that have developed their feminine energy, what appealed to you about that? And, you know, what exactly, like, what types of rewards can you see from having a man who has been tapped into their feminine side? Yeah, I would just love to hear all that. If you're a man who would still need a little bit more help on how to develop that side, I offer coaching services at denzelmensah.com. If you book me, I will literally sit down with you one-on-one and we can talk all of this over to be able to figure out like how you can tap more into that feminine side without losing your masculinity. But yeah, if you have any questions, comments, or anything, be sure to leave them below. And thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Do not forget, you matter. Done. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. And if you enjoyed that, please like and subscribe. It actually really helps out my channel a lot so that more people who actually care about what I want to say can actually find me a lot more easier. Also, if you did enjoy it, then maybe you'll enjoy a lot of my other content as well. So be sure to check out some of my playlists where you'll be able to find a lot of my older videos and older content. And last but not least, if you would like any profiling sessions or coaching sessions, be sure to check out denzelmensah.com where you'll be able to book me and you'll see the rest of my services. But thanks again and have a great day.